The scent of his son's dying blood led King Aldrich Voss through 3 days of desperate hunting to a forgotten diner bathed in neon light. No army, no council, no ancient power. Just the fading pulse of his weak-blooded heir. And when he finally found the child, a pale human waitress held him, humming a lullaby that should have meant nothing. But the infant, who had rejected every vampire touch, clung to her like salvation. In that moment, the king who had ruled for centuries realized his bloodline's survival would cost him everything he believed about his throne. The Pine Ridge diner reeked of mortality, stale coffee, grease from the fryer, the lingering sweat of truckers who'd passed through hours ago. But beneath it all, King Aldrich Voss detected the one scent that had consumed him for 3 endless days. His son's blood, weak and tainted, but unmistakably Voss. He stood in the parking lot, rain hammering against his coat, every instinct screaming that he was too late. The heir had been missing since the blood moon rose, stolen from the nursery by some enemy the night court had yet to identify. 70 vampires had scoured the mountain territories. They'd found nothing but rumors and the cold trail of a bloodline on the verge of extinction. Now the trail ended here, at a roadside diner where humans shuffled through their brief, meaningless lives. Aldrich pushed through the door. The bell chimed, a cheerful, obscene sound. His eyes, ancient and predatory, swept the empty dining room. Cracked vinyl booths, flickering fluorescent lights, a jukebox in the corner playing something forgettable. Then he saw her. She sat in the last booth, her back to him, dressed in the black uniform of a server. Dark hair pulled into a simple bun. Unremarkable. Mortal. Fragile. But in her arms, wrapped in a crimson shawl, was the impossible. Aldrich moved with inhuman speed, crossing the diner in a heartbeat. The woman didn't startle. She'd been expecting something, though perhaps not him. She turned slowly, and Aldrich found himself staring into eyes that held no fear, only exhaustion and a fierce, protective determination that had no place in a human. "Don't," she said quietly, her arms tightening around the bundle. "He's finally sleeping." Aldrich looked down. His son, Lucien, the heir to the night court, the child whose weak blood had been whispered about in shadowed corners, whose survival had been deemed impossible by the court physicians. The infant's pale face was peaceful, his tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm Aldrich hadn't seen since the birth. "Give him to me." The king's voice was low, absolute. He'd commanded armies with that tone. Ended bloodlines. Crushed rebellions. The woman, he could see her name tag now, Clara, met his eyes with something that looked dangerously like defiance. "He'll cry if I move him. He's been screaming for hours until I. He is my son. My heir. You will give him to me now." Clara hesitated, then slowly began to shift the infant toward him. Lucien's eyes snapped open. Those pale red eyes that marked him as Voss blood, however tainted. The moment the child sensed the transfer, he began to wail. Not the ordinary cry of an infant, but a sound of pure anguish, a scream that spoke of 3 days of terror and abandonment. Aldrich reached for him and Lucien thrashed, his small body convulsing with rejection. "Shua, sweetheart, it's all right," Clara murmured, pulling the baby back against her chest. Instantly, miraculously, the screaming stopped. Lucien's tiny fist clutched the fabric of her uniform, and he buried his face against her shoulder, whimpering softly. The king of the night court stood frozen, watching his heir, his blood, his legacy, cling to a mortal woman as though she were the only anchor in a drowning world. "How long have you had him?" Aldrich's voice had gone dangerously soft. "I found him about 4 hours ago. Out back in the rain, wrapped in some kind of torn blanket." Clara's hand moved in slow circles on the infant's back. "He was so cold. His temperature still hasn't come up, but he stopped shaking once I." She paused, and for the first time, real fear flickered across her face as she seemed to fully register what stood before her. "What is he?" "He is the heir to a kingdom you cannot comprehend. He is power and legacy and the continuation of a bloodline that has ruled the night for 3,000 years. Aldrich moved closer, and this time Clara did flinch. "He is mine." "Then why did someone throw him away like garbage?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but Clara didn't back down. Why was he dying alone in the rain while you? I have been searching. The admission tasted like ash. Every resource, every warrior, every dark corner of this territory. For 3 days. Clara looked down at the infant in her arms, at the way his tiny fingers had knotted themselves in her shawl, at the soft sounds of comfort he made against her shoulder. Then she looked back at the imposing figure before her, the crown catching the diner's harsh light, the elegant black clothing that spoke of wealth and power beyond measure, the eyes that held centuries of ruthless authority. He needs me, she said simply. He is weak-blooded. The attachment means nothing. It is Aldrich stopped, because the infant had turned his head at the sound of his father's voice, and instead of reaching for him, Lucien had burrowed deeper against the human woman, making small sounds of distress. Rejecting him. His own son was rejecting him. For the first time in 300 years, King Aldrich Voss felt something close to helplessness. He had come to reclaim his heir, to restore him to the Night Court, to ensure the continuation of his bloodline through whatever means necessary. He had prepared for battle, for negotiation, for blood and fire and the absolute exercise of his will. He had not prepared for this. He's so small, Clara whispered, and there was something in her voice. A tenderness, a simple human compassion, that made Aldrich's certainty crack like ancient ice. Whatever's happening between you and his mother, whatever politics or power struggles you people have, he's just a baby. He doesn't understand any of it. He's just scared and alone, and his mother is dead. The words came out harsher than intended. The weak blood comes from her line. The court physicians said he would not survive beyond his first blood moon. They were nearly right. Clara's arms tightened protectively around Lucien. Who tried to kill him? I don't know. And that perhaps was the most dangerous admission of all. But I will find out. And when I do. The bell above the door chimed again. Aldrich's head snapped toward the sound, every predatory instinct flaring to life. But it was only an old man in a trucker's cap, stomping rain from his boots. Coffee, hon? He called to Clara. She looked at Aldrich, then at the baby sleeping against her shoulder, then back at the customer. The king saw the calculation in her eyes, the awareness that she was trapped in something far beyond her understanding, holding the heir to a kingdom of nightmares. We're closed, she called back, her voice remarkably steady. The trucker grumbled but retreated into the storm. When the door swung shut, Clara turned back to Aldrich. What happens now? The king stared at his son, at the impossible sight of a weak-blooded Voss heir finding comfort in mortal arms. Every law, every tradition, every fiber of his breeding screamed that this was an abomination, that he should take the child by force and let the woman die with the memory of what she'd seen. But Lucien had stopped crying for the first time in 3 days. And the court physicians had failed where this unremarkable human had somehow succeeded. Now, Aldrich said slowly, you will come with me. Both of you. And you will keep him alive until I determine how you've done what my entire kingdom could not. And if I refuse? The king smiled, and it was not a kind expression. Then my son dies. Because he will not eat, will not sleep, will not survive without you. 3 days have proven that much. He leaned closer and Clara could feel the cold radiating from him, the ancient power that filled the space between them. So the question, Clara Whitlow, is whether your compassion extends beyond this moment. Whether you will save a child, even if it means stepping into a world that will devour you. Clara looked down at the infant one more time. At the tiny perfect features. At the way he trusted her with a faith that made her heart ache. She had come to work tonight for grocery money and her grandmother's medicine. She had been wiping down tables and counting tips and dreaming of a life that didn't involve cold coffee and midnight shifts. Now she held the heir to a vampire kingdom. And a king was waiting for her answer. He needs me, she repeated, and this time it wasn't a question. Aldrich inclined his head, the gesture somehow both elegant and threatening. Then choose, mortal. Choose your destiny. The storm raged outside. The diner lights flickered. and Clara Whitlow, waitress from Pine Ridge, looked into the eyes of the Vampire King and made the choice that would shatter both their worlds. I'll come with you. Welcome to a world where destiny defies tradition. If you love stories about forbidden connections and protecting the innocent, join our pack by clicking subscribe below, and let's know in the comment section where you are watching from. Now let's step into the rain. The car was a sleek black thing that purred through the mountain roads like a predator on the hunt. Clara sat in the back, Lucien still clutched against her chest, while Aldrich drove in silence that felt heavier than stone. She'd asked twice where they were going. He'd answered neither time. When they finally stopped, it was before gates that seemed to materialize from the darkness itself, wrought iron twisted into shapes that hurt to look at too long. The estate beyond was all Gothic spires and shadowed windows, a place that belonged in another century. Inside, Aldrich commanded, already moving toward the entrance. Clara followed because there was nothing else to do. The foyer swallowed them, all marble and candlelight and the kind of cold that had nothing to do with temperature. Aldrich turned to face her. Give him to me now. We're in the safety of my home. He no longer needs. Please don't, Clara whispered, but she knew it was futile. She shifted Lucien toward his father's waiting arms. The infant's reaction was immediate and devastating. His tiny body went rigid, and the scream that tore from his throat was pure anguish. Not the cry of discomfort, but the sound of a creature being torn from its only source of comfort. Aldrich held his son at arm's length, his expression frozen between shock and something that might have been pain. Lucien thrashed, his small fists flailing, his body convulsing with rejection so complete it seemed to fill the entire hall. Lucien! The king's voice held a note Clara had never heard, almost pleading. I am your father. Your blood. The baby's screams intensified, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Clara couldn't bear it. She reached out, her fingers barely brushing the infant's arm. It's all right, sweetheart. I'm here. The transformation was instantaneous. Lucien's cries choked off mid-scream. His tiny head turned toward Clara's voice, arms reaching desperate. The moment Aldrich handed him back, the infant buried his face against her neck and made soft, broken sounds of relief. The silence that followed was absolute. Aldrich stared at them, this mortal woman and his heir, this impossible equation that defied every law of blood and power he'd ever known. His hands hung empty at his sides. He doesn't know you, Clara said softly, rocking Lucien. He's been alone and terrified, and you're a stranger to him. But they both knew she was lying. This wasn't about familiarity. This was about something deeper, something neither understood. The weak-blooded heir had found his anchor, and she was human, mortal, completely wrong. Aldrich's jaw tightened. How long will he need you? Clara looked down at the child, at his tiny fingers knotted in her uniform. I don't know. Then you will stay until we find out. It wasn't a request. My son's survival is not negotiable. The words hung between them like a sentence passed. Clara felt the weight of the castle pressing down, the shadows moving in ways shadows shouldn't move. I have a grandmother, she said quietly. She's alone. She needs her medicine, and I'm the one who. She will be provided for. Aldrich's voice was flat, final. Money, medicine, whatever care she requires. You have my word. The word of a vampire king. Clara met his eyes. Forgive me if I don't find that particularly comforting. Something flickered across Aldrich's face, surprised that she would dare speak to him this way. You are not my prisoner. You are essential. There is a difference. Is there? But even as she said it, Clara knew she'd already made her choice. The infant in her arms was warm now, his breathing steady, his tiny fist curled around her finger with a trust that broke something inside her. What happens when he doesn't need me anymore? Then you will leave with my gratitude and enough wealth to ensure you never serve coffee to truckers again. Aldrich moved closer. But we both know that day may never come. The weak-blooded rarely survive their first year. The court physicians gave him weeks at most. Then why isn't he with them? Why bring me here instead of? Because they failed. The admission seemed to cost him. Every remedy, every ancient cure, and my son grew weaker by the hour. Then you wrap him in a cheap shawl and hum a mortal lullaby, and he thrives. His jaw tightened. I do not understand it, but I will not ignore it. Clara looked down at Lucien. What do you want from me? Keep him alive. That is all. Aldrich turned toward the shadows. But not here. The court will demand answers I'm not prepared to give. Questions about the human who holds what they consider an abomination. They'd hurt him. Clara's arms tightened protectively. Their own prince. Some believe mercy is the cruelest option for the weak-blooded, that it is kinder to let them fade. His voice went cold. Lord Cashin has been particularly vocal on the subject. The name meant nothing to Clara, but the way Aldrich said it, with barely contained fury, told her everything. So where are we going? The sanctuary of the quiet moon. A warded estate 3 hours north, abandoned for decades, forgotten by most of the court. He glanced back at her. It will buy us time. Time to understand this bond. Time to strengthen him. Time to prepare for the storm that's coming. What storm? Aldrich's smile was grim. The one that begins the moment my court discovers I've chosen a human over their counsel. Lord Cashin received word of the king's departure 2 hours before dawn. The messenger, a trembling lesser vampire who'd served the court for barely a century, stood before the council chamber with eyes downcast. The king has taken the heir to an undisclosed location. He travels with a human companion. The silence that followed was more dangerous than any scream. Cashin sat at the head of the long table, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his expression carved from ice. Around him, the 7 remaining council members exchanged glances that ranged from shock to barely concealed satisfaction. A human, Cashin repeated, his voice soft as silk over steel. The king of the night court has absconded with our weak-blooded heir and immortal. He leaned forward. Does this human have a name? The messenger swallowed. Clara Whitlow, my lord. A waitress from. I don't care if she's a duchess or a whore. Cashin rose, his movement fluid and predatory. What I care about is that our king has abandoned his court to chase after a dying aberration with a human witch in tow. My lord, perhaps witch is. What else would you call a mortal who can calm a weak-blooded infant our finest physicians couldn't save? Cashin's eyes glowed faintly. She's bewitched the heir. Used some mortal sorcery to make the child dependent on her touch. And now she has the king dancing to her tune. Council member Theron cleared his throat. The king has not commanded her execution. Perhaps we should wait for his explanation before. Wait. Cashin's laugh was cold. While this human poisons our bloodline further. 3,000 years of purity, and he throws it away for a creature who'll be dust in 50 years. The king's authority is absolute, another council member ventured. The king's authority comes from his commitment to our laws, to our traditions. Cashin's gaze swept the table. When he abandons those principles, he abandons his right to lead unchallenged. The words hung in the air like treason, but no one contradicted him. The heir is weak-blooded, Cashin continued, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. We all know what mercy demands. A swift end before the suffering prolongs. The king in his grief cannot see clearly. It falls to us to do what must be done. Theron shifted uncomfortably. You speak of retrieving the heir. I speak of saving our king from his own weakness. Cashin moved toward the window. Gather 20 of our best. We leave at nightfall. And the human? Cashin's reflection in the glass was merciless. Witches burn. The sanctuary of the quiet moon was nothing like the grand castle. It was smaller, older, built of gray stone that had weathered centuries of mountain storms. The wards hummed faintly in the walls. Ancient magic that would alert Aldrich to any intrusion. Clara didn't complain. She found a room with eastern windows, cleared a space on the floor, and made a nest of blankets for Lucien. Aldrich watched from the doorway as she worked, arranging pillows and humming that same tuneless melody. He'll need to eat, Aldrich said. The weak-blooded require. He's already eaten. Clara didn't look up. While you were warding the perimeter, I found a kitchen, boiled some water, mixed a little sugar. He took almost 2 ounces. That's impossible. He hasn't eaten in 4 days. The physicians tried everything. Maybe he didn't want their experiments. Clara finally met his eyes. Maybe he just wanted someone to hold him like he mattered. The words struck harder than they should have. Aldrich moved into the room, drawn despite himself to where Lucien lay on the blankets. The infant's color was better, his movements less frantic. "What are you doing to him?" Aldrich asked, and he meant it genuinely. Clara shrugged. "Nothing special. Keeping him warm. Talking to him. Making sure he knows he's not alone." She paused. "That's what babies need. All babies. Even ones with fangs." Aldrich knelt beside them. "The court has nursemaids. Servants trained for centuries in infant care. They know every remedy, every technique. But did they love him?" The question was quiet, but it cut through everything. Or did they see him as a problem to solve? A weak link to eliminate? Aldrich's silence was answer enough. Clara reached out, her fingertip tracing the curve of Lucien's tiny ear. The infant turned toward her touch automatically. "I had a baby sister once. She died when I was 12, premature, the doctors said. My mother wouldn't hold her those last days. Said it hurt too much." Her voice caught. "But I held her. Every minute I could. And maybe it didn't save her, but at least she knew she was wanted. I want my son." The words came out rougher than Aldrich intended. Wanting to keep something alive isn't the same as wanting it. Clara looked at him, and her eyes held a sadness that seemed older than her years. "When you look at him, what do you see? Your heir? Your legacy? Or do you see Lucien?" Aldrich opened his mouth, then closed it, because he didn't know the answer. And that truth was more terrifying than any enemy he'd ever faced. Aldrich is questioning everything, but he's out of time. The betrayal we promised is seconds away. Make sure you are subscribed and have notifications on, because the battle for the heir's life is about to begin. The wards shattered at midnight. Clara jolted awake from the chair where she'd been dozing, Lucien cradled against her chest. The sound wasn't loud, more like glass breaking underwater, muffled and wrong. But it sent ice through her veins. She was on her feet in seconds, backing toward the corner of the room. Lucien stirred, sensing her fear, his small face scrunching as if preparing to cry. "Shh, sweetheart," Clara whispered, her heart hammering. "Please, not now." Footsteps echoed in the corridor below. Many footsteps. Moving with purpose. Aldrich had left 3 hours ago. Summoned back to the court by an urgent message about a territorial breach at the eastern borders. He'd been reluctant, suspicious even, but the seal had been genuine. Clara had watched him go, promising he'd return before dawn. Now she understood. It had been a trap. The door exploded inward, torn from its hinges. Clara screamed, stumbling backward as figures poured into the room. Vampires in dark clothing, their eyes reflecting the moonlight like animals. At least a dozen of them, moving with inhuman grace. And at their head, a man who could only be Lord Cassian. Tall, elegant, with silver hair and a face that might have been handsome if not for the cold contempt twisting his features. "So this is the witch who's bewitched our king," Cassian said, his voice smooth as poisoned honey. He moved closer, and Clara pressed herself against the wall, arms locked around Lucien. "I expected something more impressive. You're just a frightened girl holding a mistake." "Get away from us," Clara managed, though her voice shook. "Or what? You'll hum at me." Cassian laughed, and several of his followers joined in. "The king isn't here to protect you, mortal. He's chasing shadows 50 miles east, thanks to young Marcus here." He gestured to a nervous-looking vampire near the door. "The guard who led us through the wards. A true believer in the old ways." Marcus wouldn't meet Clara's eyes. "This doesn't have to be violent," Cassian continued, stopping just outside her reach. "Give me the abomination, and I'll make your death quick. You won't even feel it." He's not an abomination. Clara's arms tightened around Lucien, who was whimpering now, sensing the danger. He's a baby. He's innocent. He's weak-blooded. A stain on the Voss legacy. Cassian's expression hardened. The kindest thing we can do is end his suffering and remove the human infection that's corrupted the king's judgment. Aldrich will kill you for this. Aldrich will thank me once he's free of your spell. Cassian nodded to his men. Take the child. Kill the witch. They moved forward as one, and Clara did the only thing she could. She turned her back, curved her body around Lucien, and made herself a shield between the infant and the advancing nightmare. The first blow never came. Instead, she heard Cassian's voice, cold with satisfaction. On second thought, let her watch. Let her see what her compassion has wrought. Then we'll end her. Cassian reached for Lucien and Clara twisted away, her body still curved protectively around the infant. His fingers caught her shoulder, yanking her backward with inhuman strength. She cried out as she hit the floor, her grip on Lucien loosening. No! Clara scrambled to her knees, reaching for the baby even as Cassian's hand closed around the infant's blanket. Lucien began to scream, that same anguished wail from the castle, the sound of a child being torn from safety. But this time Clara heard something else beneath it, a higher pitch, almost ultrasonic, a distress call that traveled beyond mortal hearing. Cassian lifted the infant by the blanket, holding him at arm's length like something contaminated. Look at it. This is what passes for Voss blood now. Pathetic. Please, Clara begged, tears streaming down her face. Please, he's just a baby. He hasn't done anything wrong. His existence is wrong. Cassian's free hand began to glow with a sickly green light. Some kind of vampiric magic Clara didn't understand. This is mercy. You're too human to see it. The magic coalesced into a blade of pure energy, sharp and lethal. Cassian raised it toward the screaming infant. Clara didn't think. She lunged forward, throwing herself between the blade and Lucien. The energy tore through her abdomen, and the pain was unlike anything she'd ever known. Not just physical but something deeper, as if the magic was unmaking her at a cellular level. She collapsed, but her arms closed around Lucien as she fell, pulling him against her chest even as her blood soaked through both their clothes. The infant's cries turned to confused whimpers, his tiny hands clutching at her. You stupid girl, Cassian hissed, but there was something like surprise in his voice. You're dying for an abomination that isn't even your species. Clara couldn't speak. The pain was too great, the darkness creeping in at the edges of her vision. But she held Lucien tighter, her body still a shield even as it failed. How touching! Cassian knelt beside them, preparing another strike. Don't worry. You'll both be together in death. I'm sure that's very comforting. Clara closed her eyes, pressing her lips to Lucien's forehead. At least he wouldn't die alone. At least he'd know in these final moments that someone had fought for him. I'm sorry, she whispered to the child. I'm so sorry I couldn't. The wall exploded inward. Stone and ancient timber erupted into the room as something massive tore through the sanctuary's western wall. Through the dust and debris, Aldrich emerged, and he was nothing like the composed King Clara had known. This was something primal, something that had existed long before courts and crowns and civilization. His eyes blazed crimson, so bright they cast red shadows across the room. His hands had become claws, black and terrible, and the power radiating from him made the air itself scream. Aldrich's gaze swept the scene. Clara on the floor, blood spreading beneath her, Lucien covered in red and wailing. Cassian standing over them, magic still crackling around his hands. The king's roar shattered every remaining window in the sanctuary. He moved like lightning given form. One moment he stood in the ruined wall. The next, his hand was through Cassian's chest, emerging from the lord's back with his heart still beating in his palm. You dare, Aldrich whispered, his voice layered with something ancient and utterly merciless. You dare touch what is mine. Cassian's eyes went wide with shock, then terror. My lord, I was saving you from. Aldrich crushed the heart to pulp. Cassion's body crumbled to ash before it hit the floor. The king turned to the remaining vampires, the 20 warriors who'd followed their lord on this unauthorized mission. They stood frozen, caught between loyalty and survival. "Run," Aldrich said softly. "Or join him." They ran. Only Marcus remained, the young guard who'd betrayed the wards, pressed against the far wall and shaking. Aldrich looked at him for one long moment, then dismissed him with a gesture. "You're not worth the effort. Go. Tell the court what happens to traitors." Marcus fled. Then Aldrich was kneeling beside Clara, and the rage drained from him, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "Clara. Clara, look at me." She tried. Her eyes were glazed, unfocused. Her breathing was shallow, wet-sounding. Lucien lay against her chest, covered in her blood, crying weakly. Aldrich lifted his son carefully, passing him to the side where he'd be safe, then gathered Clara into his arms. The wound was catastrophic. Cassion's magic had torn through organs that no mortal could survive losing. "You fool," Aldrich whispered, his voice breaking in a way it hadn't for centuries. "You beautiful, stupid fool. Why did you?" But he knew why. She told him. Because Lucien mattered. Because even a weak-blooded heir deserved to be wanted. Clara's hand lifted weakly, touching his face. "Lucien. Safe. He's safe because of you." She smiled, blood on her lips. "Good. I can save you." The words came out desperate. "There's a way. But it breaks our oldest law. You'd be bound to me. Forever changed. No longer fully human. Will I still be me?" "I don't know," Aldrich admitted. "But you'll be alive." Clara's eyes were closing. "Then, do it." Aldrich bit his own wrist, tearing deep, and pressed it to her mouth. "Drink. Drink and live, Clara Whitlow. By my blood and my will live." His ancient blood, royal blood, carried through 3,000 years, poured into her. Clara swallowed reflexively, once, twice, and then her body convulsed. The wound in her abdomen began to close, flesh knitting together with unnatural speed. Her eyes snapped open, glowing faintly red. The transformation had begun. And somewhere in the deepest vaults of the night court, the ancient laws screamed in protest. The throne room fell silent as Aldrich entered, Clara at his side and Lucien in her arms. Every member of the night court had been summoned, all 300 vampires who comprised the kingdom's nobility, warriors, and advisors. They lined the great hall, watching with expressions that ranged from shock to barely concealed horror. Clara felt their stares like physical weight. She was different now, stronger, faster, her senses sharp enough to hear hearts beating throughout the room. But she was still herself, still human enough to fear what came next. Aldrich ascended the dais, his presence commanding absolute attention. He wore his crown and formal robes, every inch the ancient king. But there was something new in his bearing, a finality, as if he'd crossed a threshold that could never be uncrossed. 3 nights ago, Aldrich began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, Lord Cassion and 20 warriors breached the sanctuary where I had placed my heir for his protection. They came without my knowledge, without my consent, with the intent to execute both my son and the woman who saved his life. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. Lord Cassion believed he was saving me from corruption, from weakness, from the contamination of human influence. Aldrich's eyes swept the room. He was wrong, and he paid for that error with his life. The murmurs died instantly. But Cassion did not act alone. He was emboldened by centuries of tradition that told him weak blood was worthless, that purity mattered more than compassion, that humans were beneath our consideration. Aldrich's voice hardened. "Those traditions end tonight." He gestured to Clara. She climbed the steps, her legs steadier than she expected, and stood beside the throne. Lucien cooed softly against her shoulder, content and healthy in ways he'd never been in vampire hands alone. "This is Clara Whitlow. She is human, or was until I gave her my blood to save her life. She is now bloodbound to the royal line, and she has done what all our physicians, all our ancient knowledge, all our proud bloodlines could not. She has kept my heir alive. Aldrich's hand rested on Clara's shoulder, a gesture of both protection and proclamation. From this night forward, Clara Whitlow bears the title bloodbound guardian. She is under my direct protection. Any who threaten her threaten me. Any who question her right to stand in this court question the throne itself. The silence was deafening. Furthermore, Aldrich continued, I decree the following laws. First, no vampire may be executed for weakness of blood without direct royal consent. Second, humans who serve the court with loyalty and distinction may be granted sanctuary and protection. Third, the council's authority to act without royal approval is hereby revoked. Council member Theron stepped forward, his ancient face troubled. My lord, these changes, they overturn 3 millennia of. They overturn nothing that matters. Aldrich cut him off. They preserve what does. My son's life, the future of this kingdom, the truth that strength comes not from purity of blood, but from the courage to protect what we love. He looked down at Clara, at Lucien sleeping peacefully in her arms, and something in his expression softened. I have ruled for 3,000 years by tradition. Perhaps it is time I rule by choice. 6 weeks after the decree, Clara stood in the castle's eastern garden, watching Lucien attempt to crawl across the grass. The child had grown stronger, healthier, his weak blood no longer the death sentence the court physicians had proclaimed. He babbled happily, reaching for flowers he couldn't quite grasp. He's getting faster, Aldrich said, emerging from the shadows. He did that less now lurked in darkness. Clara's presence had brought more light to the castle, literally and figuratively. Candles burned in previously shuttered halls. Windows opened to let in moonlight. He'll be walking soon, Clara replied, and there was wonder in her voice. The physicians said he wouldn't survive to see his first season. The physicians were wrong about many things. Aldrich moved closer, watching his son with an expression that had softened considerably over the weeks. Not fully warm. He was still an ancient vampire king, but no longer carved from ice. As if sensing his father's presence, Lucien turned. His red eyes, brighter now, healthier, fixed on Aldrich. Then, wobbling, the infant pulled himself to his feet. Both Clara and Aldrich froze. Is he? Clara whispered. Lucien took one unsteady step toward his father. Then another. His small face was determined, focused with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone so young. 3 steps. 4. Aldrich dropped to his knees, his hands outstretched. Lucien, come to me, my son. The infant took 2 more lurching steps, then his balance failed. But instead of falling, he was caught by his father's hands, steady and sure. Aldrich lifted him, and for the first time since Clara had known them, Lucien didn't cry in his father's arms. Instead he laughed, a bright sound that echoed through the garden. Aldrich's eyes closed briefly, something like pain crossing his face. I didn't know if he would ever. He knows you now, Clara said softly, moving to stand beside them. You're not a stranger anymore. You're his father. Lucien reached out from Aldrich's arms, his small hands grasping for Clara. She took him, and the child settled contentedly between them, one hand clutching each of their shirts, as if anchoring himself to both. This is what you meant, Aldrich said quietly, watching his son. When you asked if I saw Lucien or just the heir. I see him now. I see my son. Clara smiled. I know. They stood together in the garden, vampire king, bloodbound human and weak-blooded heir. And the castle around them felt different. Lighter. As if the weight of 3,000 years of rigid tradition was finally beginning to lift. From a forgotten diner to the throne of the night court, they defied the odds. If you enjoyed this journey, subscribe now. We have an even darker tale of romance and magic coming next week that you won't want to miss. Later that evening, Aldrich addressed the court once more. His voice rang through the throne room, commanding and clear. We stand at a crossroads, he declared. Behind us lies the certainty of what we have always been. Before us lies the uncertainty of what we might become. I choose the uncertain future. I choose mercy over tradition, compassion over purity, love over law. He looked at Clara, at Lucien in her arms, and his expression held something that might have been peace. This is my destiny. This is our kingdom's destiny, and I embrace it willingly. The court watched in silence, and slowly one by one they bowed.